Doc Ryan, Expedition 44. Today I took my son Will duck hunting out on the Mississippi River, and he shot this beautiful black duck, purple wings. I've never shot one before. I mean, this was quite the catch. And so we came home, and I've been excited all day to talk about Ruth chapter 4. I hardly got any sleep last night, and I'm exhausted, but I came home and I couldn't wait to get to Ruth chapter 4, because this is kind of the culmination of what we've been doing. We did the introduction, which was super fun. We went through Ruth chapter 1, Ruth chapter 2, gleaned all this really cool, intricate details about, you know, the picture God was painting here. And then we kind of stumbled through chapter 3 of all the sexual overtone that most evangelical people just want to pass right over and not even address. And we addressed it. We worked through it, we talked, and we actually found that it created a beautiful, holy picture about what was going on. I mean, there were some implications there, and, you know, we talked through that stuff. But now we get to chapter 4. And you might remember when we started this, I've kind of been talking about several things in here, but when we started, Ruth was basically destitute. I mean, she was in the lowest of low. I mean, one, she's a woman in Bible times that wasn't looked upon the same way that it is now, and she didn't have anything. And so when we look at her life, what was she missing? She was missing food. It was a time of famine. She was missing family. I mean, her family had died, and she was, you know, talking about going to a place where she didn't have anybody. And then there was the land problem. And we're going to talk through some of that stuff too. And so it's this crazy up and down roller coaster ride where we find ourselves into chapter 4. And I love this because we've been kind of tiptoeing at redemption, and chapter 4 is the chapter of redemption. All right, so let's start with the first verse. It says, "Now Boaz went up to the gate and sat down there, and behold, the close relative of whom Boaz spoke was passing by. So he said, 'Turn aside, friend, sit down.' And he turned aside and sat down." Now, there's a couple things to take away here. One, I think Boaz probably was being strategic in finding him, but he also addresses him as friend, and so maybe there's, you know, a close tie or something going on here. But we also see this word behold, and when you see the word behold, it's kind of showing that there's probably some divine intervention in bringing them together. And Boaz seems like the type of person that has been, so far in the story, very connected to that spirit or divine intervention. So I think that he's probably in tune with God and, you know, the one and the same working together. So that's kind of a neat picture to glean out of what he's doing. Now, there's the city gate and then there's the elders. And to understand this, the city gate was kind of where wisdom, business was done. The wise people. Now remember that in Israel, this is also going to be the godly people. And we see that godly reference through the people at the gate quite a time. And you might remember in the Old Testament, there's also a couple verses that say the city gate was barred, meaning no one would be able to come in and that they wouldn't speak to anybody. So there are times that we see where they were just kind of done with this and they closed the doors, and it's kind of a picture of sometimes people closing their hearts, but the picture here is that the doors are open to the gleaning of the heart. And so we come in here and there's 10 elders kind of positioned listening to this. And what's interesting, I find, is the Redeemer's name is never mentioned. It's kind of the no name, and it's looks better in Hebrew. It's kind of a Hebrew idiom to show this, but there's actually a little significance that there's no name mentioned there, kind of meaning, do you want to be a person of a lasting legacy, or do you want to be the person that's not even mentioned? So think about that for a second too. Now, Boaz is kind of a businessman, and we get the idea that he's well prepared, very smooth, strategic, bathed in the Spirit. I mean, everything we know of this guy is just, he's doing it right, and this is no different than the rest of the story. We see that he's putting in the time and that all this is lining up for him. So as we follow this, we also have to remember that who was his mother? His mother was Rahab. You probably remember who Rahab was. So what's interesting is, successful as he seems to be here, he's also a little bit of a foreigner, or not 100% Israel himself. And that might play into the accepting of Ruth throughout this story too, if you would consider that for a minute. And you have to start thinking about Deuteronomy 25 again. Was this a Levirate marriage? And it seems to have a lot of correlation to Deuteronomy 25, but it falls short in several different places, and I kind of just want to name a few of those. One, in Deuteronomy 25, we hear of spitting, that if he doesn't accept, then he's spit on, and that's kind of a metaphor that from that point on, people kind of refer to him that way. And we don't see that. Also, the woman that was kind of left at that point would have been disgraced. That would have been a very disgraceful message, and we don't really get that. In fact, Ruth's not even around in this. I mean, it seems like she's someplace else, and he's just having this conversation. There's a couple other things. The shoe thing, we're going to talk about that a little bit more later, but it's not quite right in terms of Deuteronomy 25. And then this is not Ruth's husband's brother. It's a distant relative. And so what I'm kind of saying, and there's even more besides that, but what I'm kind of saying is that it still fits the picture of Deuteronomy 25 and the Levirate marriage, but it's just kind of estranged a little bit. But we get the idea, especially with the 10 elders, that they're very much accepting it this way, and so they're kind of playing through that a little bit too. So now when we look at this, it's kind of this picture of holy land that was left. And the idea of the Redeemer redeeming this is, do you want this land? And land was huge. I mean, I think for the most part, you associated land with God's blessings and his footprint, and so you wanted land. So at first, when this is offered to No Name, he seems to kind of gravitate towards wanting it, but then Boaz kind of continues down that and mentions Ruth the Moabite woman. Now remember, she's nowhere around, so we kind of get the picture she was probably beautiful, but he's not seeing that at this point. He's just hearing a Moabite woman, and you might remember that this doesn't really have good overtones to it. In fact, you might remember 24,000 Israelites struck down. There is probably some tension between this, and so as soon as he hears this word Moab, he's probably checked out. And there's something to be said for this, because God does give a command to his people not to intermarry, not to have anything to do with that. And so it's actually kind of neat here how the No Name is probably still thinking that he's doing the right thing, but we're not really seeing him being guided in the way that Boaz is being led by the Spirit. And we just don't have information there, so don't read too much into it. But we get the picture with Boaz that God is building this into him. And so it's just a great picture of two people both thinking they're pursuing probably God's holiness according to the Word. And, we don't really see them fighting, but they probably both think they're right in their own accord, and guess what? They actually both might be okay before the eyes of God in their accord. We just don't know that, and a lot of times, in life, I think this is a good analogy of, there's another side to every understanding or situation. Now, there's one more part of this that I just love. There's also one thing where Boaz says, oh yeah, and grandma's included. So you get a new mother-in-law. I'll just kind of leave that one where it is. But anyway, then we get to the sandal, the removing of the sandal. And this differs a little bit from Deuteronomy 25. If you read the two of them, you'll see the differences there. But there's a lot of significance here that's important that we need to touch on. And so sandals are really important in the Bible. We read about the dust of the world, and for the most part, the earth at this point, the biblical narrative is that it's filthy because of what the people have done to it. And so sandals separate you. Your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit, especially thinking New Testament wise, and it separates you from the world. You're an alien there. And so when you go through any kind of purification ritual, you can cleanse your whole body, but you can't wear your sandals into that holy ground, that holy setting. And so you would remove your sandals, and it's also something that the sandals connected you with what you had on earth, the material possession, which the outward sign of that was land. And so when you took your sandals off into a ritual purification ceremony, you're basically saying, I'm checking this at the door, and everything that I had, I'm putting aside for this. And so that's a picture of marriage, but it's also a picture of being in the presence of the Lord, saying that nothing else matters. I'm focusing completely on this. And that's where the holy and sacred ground comes, that everything that has been given to me that's associated with ground and land and possessions has been given to me by God. And so when you take this sandal and you kind of do this disowning thing or something like that, that's kind of basically showing the person and everybody around in using a symbol that you're going to take back your right or your ownership to that part of the ground. And so I love just the symbol of sandals, and it's even a lot richer than that. Maybe that's a whole nother film in itself. But we see a lot of that working through in this story of Ruth. Now what's really interesting is about this connection is that Ruth actually kind of represents land throughout the whole story. Kind of that spiritual thing of how there was land represented through Elimelech first, and then it goes away, and so it's kind of a reclaiming of the land, so to speak, by reclaiming Ruth. And so there's this idea that land lasts for generations, and we see that here, in that what's really neat about this is that land that Ruth brings back into the line of Boaz and eventually David and the Messiah. We see that in the New Testament, in that when David is tending his flocks and sheep, that's probably Elimelech's land that was given by Ruth. And then later when there's an announcement in the same type of place, that was again a connection to Ruth. So she is the land in the picture, that kind of what represents some of the sacredness to this whole story and getting it back. It's the prized possession, so to speak. And it's so interesting how at the beginning she doesn't see herself as a prized possession, but the Redeemer does. Now there's more connections here. You got to go all the way back to Eden here and say that God designed us to live in harmony in earth and in Eden, to be equipped with all of the things that He created and dwell together and roll together. And so the picture of the Bible is kind of this falling apart and God bringing it back, rebuilding it, and the end picture is a picture very similar to that, with us reigning and ruling with Him. And so it all kind of connects that way, and we get to this speech that Boaz gives, and it's a beautiful speech, and he kind of is well correlated on how he puts it all together, and it's transpired and inspirational and everything like that. But what I really like is how when he gives this speech, again, he's professing his heart. It's this outward sign. So if you missed it anywhere, this is what I'm trying to say. And when we look at Ruth, we see her in Ruth 1 starting out as a foreigner, totally destitute. And the next picture is as a slave. And then she kind of steps up and is a servant. And then the last picture is she's given this beautiful, full inheritance, and she's transformed into this glorious life that, I mean, it's a picture of how could it be any better? Full redemption. And this is really important if you have a Deuteronomy 32 worldview. If you don't know what that is, I have a couple videos on it, and you're definitely going to want to watch that. But I kind of just alluded to it with Eden, and there's even more than that. We have this original covenant that God makes, and then His people kind of break that covenant apart, and then He says, well, my portion is Israel, and then they kind of get wayward. But the idea is He brings them back, and through this idea of Ruth, even through the Gentiles, He's going to reclaim all of these things. And that's really what the elders are going to say, which just blows me away here when you start hearing them talking about this, because what they're saying is that as God sent the blessings to the 12 tribes of Israel and started those, may He also send a similar blessing to Ruth, which is the seed, the inheritance, the Messiah, which is going to be the ones that brings back all the nations. So all these things are just incredibly intertwined. And when you look at it this way, there's just a ton of theology in the book of Ruth. So we continue reading, and then Tamar and Judah are kind of listed there, and oh my goodness, like I don't even want to get into that one after Ruth chapter 3. It's kind of similar to that, but it does connect to the story, and if you do some further studying, there's actually some really neat kind of things that connect this and flush out through it. But we keep going, and we have all this building up. I mean, chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, all of chapter 4. And then, this is so funny, in one verse, we get a wedding and a baby. It's like all this drawn out, then boom, there is new life and expectation to go even much further than that. And so, what the writer does here is just unreal. And this is amazing how he continues to go that, and the Lord enabled her to conceive. Now there's only two places. The whole book, I mean, it's got God's footprints and fingerprints all over it, so to speak, but it actually only says Lord twice. And the first time is when God is talking about in chapter 1 providing for the faithful during famine, and that's the whole picture of Boaz is a picture of how he does that. And then in the end, the Lord enabled her to conceive. And remember how I started out this video? We have food, and then we also have two things. We have life through family, and then we have this idea of a seed. Basically, God has packaged it all up and written the whole story of what is important. Now, if you lived in this time of the Judges, that's what was important to you. You needed food, you needed a connection to family, and then lastly, you needed significance in being sacred, which is a connection to God and land. And so at the beginning of this, Ruth has none of it. She's totally destitute, and by the end, she has this full picture, and her cup is actually overflowing. That's kind of the significance of the ladies saying 7 sons. The 7 is this idea of picture of completeness. And they're saying, Ruth, like, this is amazing. You couldn't be any more complete than this. But what's even more amazing than that is they're actually saying this of Naomi overflowed. And Naomi, we don't really necessarily see making great decisions through these chapters. In fact, she makes 3 kind of pretty bad decisions. So what do we attribute this to? We attribute to Ruth's decisions and blessing those around her, enabling them to also be blessed. And we see that tenet throughout the scripture that if you uphold family, godly values, and you bind them together, that God will continue to bless you in that same way and expound those blessings to those outside of you and your family. Now, I love the women in here. They're kind of linked with the 10 elders. And at the beginning, they're giving joy. They're trying to build up Naomi. And at the end, they get to name the child, which I just think is totally fascinating. But they continue to give joy, support, and encouragement. And that's kind of an idea of what elders should be doing throughout the church. But what's really interesting is when they refer to Obed, he is now referred to as the Redeemer. Did you catch that in here? Like, up until this point, it's Boaz as the Redeemer, and then all of a sudden they shift the pattern, and Obed is the Redeemer because Obed is the seed. Do you get this? The seed that is going to bring the Messiah. And that is a picture of the redemption. It's this two-poled mirror that we have kind of been seeing through this whole narrative of how it's a picture of a story that really happened in Boaz and Ruth, but it's also this glorious story of hope and joy for the nation of Israel, for Gentiles, for the nations, and for a new heaven and earth, and for those relationships to be restored and for us to roll once again with God. And so I just love how it connects all that. It's like by the time we get here, I'm just getting shivers down my spine left and right because it's making all these connections. And so we get these ladies naming Obed, and then kind of this idea that if you didn't get it, this is the Messiah. And it kind of makes this connection where Ruth 4:22 stops. We see Matthew 1:5 picking up, and we get the genealogy 10 years in the book of Ruth, and then Matthew fulfills this. And so there's nothing left out here. Like, they're just laying it out here that if you didn't get it, you're going to see that even though times look very dull and dreary in Judges, God was already making plan B provisions, let's call it, to bring back the nations and tie this all together. Now, when I go through this book, at the end of it, I say, now what do we get out of it? What's the big picture? What do we take home? We learned some great things about Ruth, and I think there was a lot to pull into our lives and to apply, and I hope you've been doing that over the last couple of weeks as I've been talking through this. But there's some other things here too. And the thing that I get out of this is the Redeemer. In order to be a Redeemer, you have to have that right to redeem. And did Boaz have that right? Yes. But more importantly, does Jesus have that right to redeem? We see that he's owned us. He's celebrated by his blood in doing that. And second is the resources. Now, Boaz had the resources. We don't know if the other person did or didn't, but there's a price to redemption. And then the last one is a resolve, is that you have to want it. You have to understand it. You have to have a passion. And during this whole story, we see that Boaz went after this, that he wasn't just sitting on the sidelines, that when he became knowledgeable of it, he was driven to do it. And a lot of times I think we just kind of sit around and we don't have the passion that God wants us to go after these things, because that's how he does it. That's the picture of what he's showing, how he has kind of done everything that he has pursued us. Even though we don't think we're worth it, he's dropped everything in this amazing labor of love to find us and to pull us back into him in an intimate relationship with him. Now we get the idea that God doesn't just accept us, but he's fighting for us. He's going out after us. And I love that concept within the book of Ruth. And we see that at the gate, that Boaz is he's strategically executing this plan as the Lord has strategically executed the plan for our redemption. And I don't know if you've thought about this, but there's 4 women mentioned in the genealogy of Christ, and when you look at those 4 women, they're all pictures of kind of this lowly, low, sinful world that God's people has kind of turned into. And, you know, the idea is that if those people can be involved even to the Messiah's bloodline, then so can everybody else that is out there. And so I want you to kind of think about that for a second and think about where you stand in this picture. Many of us are kind of here and we haven't really given God everything. We haven't really, poured out and said, this is everything that we have inside of us, our nephesh, our soul, everything that's, coming out of us to work towards finding that peace, prosperity, and that joy in the Lord that he wants to give us. Not only does he want to, but he's doing everything that he can to seek us out and give us that redemption within him. And today, that's what he wants of you. He wants to give you a life so full, a journey that you can't possibly understand. He wants your cup to be overflowing, and it's really a picture of completely relying on what he has for you. May God bless you and keep you.